I showed her the parts where she was stuck.
So, you mean, like this?
As she typed on the keyboard, the program launched just as expected. There you go. I got excited and snapped my fingers. All right. Now, let's move on to the next. Suddenly, her hand touched mine.
Well, I still don't know your name, do I?
Her sudden comment made me flustered. Oh, me. Just as I was about to brush it off, and what happened next? My name is Michael Donovan and I'm 34. I'm here at the headquarters of a certain manufacturing company, checking in as a visitor. It seems the receptionist was informed about me, and I could feel their curious glances. Trying to escape those looks, I quickly finished the check-in process and headed straight for the elevator to the CEO's office. After having a brief chat with the CEO, I was given permission to take a look around the floors, so I casually wandered through each one. Everyone glanced at me, but thanks to my mask, which I wore due to allergies, and the visitor badge hanging from my neck, I only received a passing glance as if to say, "Ah, just someone's guest." Everyone was working diligently. One department seemed to have smooth communication, chatting amicably without neglecting their tasks. Another department, probably busier, had people glued to their computers, working intensely. I made a mental note of the characteristics of each department. Then, on the third floor, for the first time since arriving at this company, I felt something was off for some reason. It was a department where people were engrossed in their computer work just like the other one I had seen. The sign read, IT Department. This must be where they handle the system-related tasks. In the midst of everyone quietly working at their computers, the source of my discomfort was near the window. I approached and asked, "Hello there. What are you doing?" The woman I spoke to startled, her shoulders twitching as she turned to face me. She was a petite woman.
I'm making flowers out of paper,
She said, shifting her gaze behind her. I followed her gaze, and saw a sign with the company's name.
There's an event coming up soon to showcase our products to a client. The sign is a bit plain, so I thought I'd decorate it to make it more eye-catching.
I understood what she was doing. Even so, something still felt off. Are you doing this alone? It would go faster with a few people helping. I asked quietly, trying not to disrupt the tense atmosphere. She frowned slightly, and said with a downcast look,
There's no other work I can do right now.
I furrowed my brow as well. A quick glance at the employee badge hanging around her neck showed her name, Sarah Bennett, IT Department. While the rest of the IT team seemed busy, glued to their computers, it didn't make sense that she had nothing to do. Sensing my silence, she added,
I just transferred from a regional office to the headquarters, but the programming language they're using here is different from what I'm used to. With the event coming up, there isn't time to train me right now.
Since we were at work, we both knew we should keep the conversation brief. She also seemed to think so, and initially the explanation was minimal, but I managed to understand the details eventually. What programming language are they using here? Her answer reassured me. I know that one too. Want me to teach you after hours? She quickly shook her head.
No, I'm good. I couldn't possibly inconvenience someone from another company.
It seemed she mistook me for an outsider because of the visitor badge I was wearing. Oh, sorry, I work here. I just recently came back from another branch too, and I'm currently on a week's vacation. I'm here today just to take care of some paperwork. It wouldn't be any trouble to help out a colleague, right? I tried to reassure her with a smile, though I wasn't sure it came across through my mask. She shook her head again, looking down.
No, I'd feel bad. Especially since you're on vacation.
I considered not pushing the issue further, but I've never been the type to leave someone in a tough spot. I'm enjoying my time off during the day, so my evenings are free. I mean, it's fine if you don't need help, but it seems like you really want to get some work done. My words made her look up in surprise. She hesitated, but finally whispered,
If it's not too much trouble, I'd appreciate it.
Her reply was still uncertain. I nodded with a gentle smile. All right, after work, do you know where the local community center is? They have a study room there. She widened her eyes at my suggestion, though she said nothing, so I continued. Oh, do you think you can find the place? I'll be there reading for a while, so if you're up for learning after work, just come by. With that, I left the floor. Hasn't changed much, or maybe it's gotten a bit older. I stood in front of the community center, lost in thought. That community center had been a staple in my life since my student days. It had a large library, and the study rooms provided individual, secluded spaces ideal for concentration, with a room next door for group study sessions. You couldn't be too loud, but quiet conversations to help each other out were allowed, making it a comfortable and accessible place with a decent number of regulars. At the time of year, with the new school term just starting, the study rooms weren't too crowded. Before exams, it would get packed, and finding a seat became a challenge. Exams, huh? I felt a wave of nostalgia. Back in college, I once helped a middle school girl with her studies. It was just a few times, but I remember how much fun it was, like I was a teacher. Most of the time, she was so focused on her notebook that I could only see the top of her head. I still remember her tearful expression when she struggled with something and the bright smile when she finally understood. It was such a stark contrast that it amused me. Come to think of it, she kind of reminds me of the woman I met today. If I recall correctly, the name of the woman at the office was Sarah Bennett. The look on her face as she made those decorative flowers, head down, reminded me of that middle school girl's teary face. Even her petite size was the same. Feeling a bit nostalgic, I found myself lost in memories, forgetting to even read the book I'd brought. I stood in a corner of the community center with a good view of the place. I don't know how long I stood there, daydreaming. The door to the community center opened, and a familiar woman hurried, walking briskly. Hi, right here. I called out, and she looked around, searching for the source of the voice. When she saw me, she broke into a bright smile. Her rapidly changing expressions were quite charming, I thought. We immediately moved to the group study room, and she introduced herself.
I'm Sarah Bennett. I appreciate your big help.
I nodded with a smile, and she quickly opened her laptop, pulling out a stack of reference books from her bag. I had also picked out a book at the library, but it turned out I didn't really need it. You've been working hard on your own, I remarked. Sarah frowned slightly.
But self-study only takes me so far.
I figured as much. There are countless programming languages in the world. Broadly speaking, they can be divided into two categories: compiled languages and scripting languages. Compiled languages are faster in terms of execution speed but are more complex. Let's say they're more machine-friendly. On the other hand, scripting languages are easier for people to use but generally slower in processing speed. Since Sarah mainly worked with scripting languages, the compiled language used by our company's IT department was totally foreign to her.
I feel kind of pathetic. I was so excited when I got promoted to the headquarters, but now it feels like I went to study abroad in Japan with just an N3 certificate.
I almost laughed at her analogy. Although I wasn't sure about the details. Japanese language certificate. Scripting languages are still real programming languages. So, I guess, it's not like having an N3 certificate. It's more like being fluent in French or Chinese but struggling in Japan. I responded. Sarah smiled at that. So I guarantee you, you're pretty amazing. I mean, you optimized the main system at the factory using a scripting language, and it got adopted by another plant too. She suddenly furrowed her brow.
Wait, did I ever tell you the details about why I was transferred to headquarters?
Her question caught me off guard. I just figured moving from a regional branch to the headquarters IT department meant you had that kind of accomplishment. My fumbling response only made her look more suspicious. Panicking a bit, I reached for one of her reference books. So, shall we get started? What's been giving you trouble? Though still looking suspicious, she glanced down at her book. She had a range of textbooks from beginner to advanced, but she had already self-taught herself the basics. It seemed she was stuck somewhere in the middle, so I started helping her with the areas where she was struggling.
So, you mean, like this?
She typed on the keyboard, and the program ran exactly as expected. There you go. I got excited and snapped my fingers. All right. Now for the next. Just as I was about to explain the next part using the textbook, her hand brushed against mine. Surprised, I looked at her, and she was wide-eyed.
You still haven't told me your name, have you?
Her sudden comment threw me off. Oh, me? Call me Mike. To my introduction, she shook her head vigorously. As I was confused, she softly whispered.
You are Michael Donovan, right?
Her accurate guess left me wide-eyed in surprise. She looked at me with tearful eyes.
I once studied with you here.
The moment she said that, the memory of the middle school girl I'd been vaguely recalling earlier suddenly became crystal clear. It was when I was in college. I was close to graduating and preparing for my next steps. It wasn't a path I was excited about. I had always wanted to become a teacher. Nevertheless, due to family circumstances, my career path had been decided for me. I was sitting in the study room, absent-mindedly staring at a book full of information I needed for my future job, feeling rather disheartened. Then, I heard a faint sniffle from beside me. At first, I thought it might be allergies since I have them too, but it seemed to be something else. Pretending to head to the restroom, I glanced over and saw a girl in a school uniform with her head buried in her arms on the desk. Hey, what's wrong? I asked softly, surprised. She slowly lifted her face, revealing a tear-streaked mess with her nose running. Her expression was so full of despair that it wasn't something you could laugh at.
I don't get it.
On the desk was an open math workbook. It seemed she was preparing for the exam. Before I knew it, I found myself speaking. Would you like me to help? Her tear-filled eyes widened in surprise. I scratched my head. I can help if you'd like. I think I remember enough middle school math to be of use. Hearing this, she made a face, a mix of frustration and disbelief.
Does that mean this stuff is easy for you? Is math going to get so hard that this seems easy?
I couldn't help but laugh at how she was already worrying about the difficulty of future math problems when she was struggling with the ones right in front of her. Well, for now, let's just work through this problem, okay? However, she hesitated.
But you came here to study too, right? I'd feel bad taking up your time.
Being considerate at such a young age made me smile wryly. It's fine. This is something I can do anytime. You're the one who's on a tight schedule, right? She nodded so quickly it made me laugh again.
After that, every time we ran into each other by chance, you'd help me out, right? I kept studying math after that, and then, I went on to study math in college as well.
I mentally connected the face of that middle school girl I had vaguely remembered with the woman standing in front of me. It was definitely the same person.
Even though you were wearing a mask, something about your demeanor felt familiar to me. It was an unforgettable memory for me. You snapped your fingers when I got something right. That's when I knew for sure.
Sarah's gentle smile made my face grow warm. But, how did you know my name? We never exchanged names back then, did we? She chuckled softly. Then she said,
Why don't we step outside for a bit? We're in a study room, but I don't think either of us is in the right state to study anymore.
Although the study room was empty except for the two of us, she was right, we weren't in the mood for studying. We moved to the park next to the community center, and sat on a bench. The breeze felt refreshing.
As for how I know your name, please don't think I'm weird, okay? Back then, the book you had with you, your name was written in it, and I memorized it. I even wrote it down later in my notebook, Michael Donovan.
Hearing her formally say my name made my heart skip a beat.
I've always wanted to thank you. After the day before my exam, we didn't see each other again. Even after I started high school and then went on to college, I'd come to this community center sometimes hoping to run into you, but we never did. I really wanted to say thank you.
She was about to crying, and I panicked a bit. I'm just glad you remembered me. And, I'm sorry I didn't say anything back then. I ended up having to go overseas for work right after that. She nodded quietly as I explained.
I think it's like a stupid question, but your surname Donovan, it's the same as our company CEO's one, right? Could it be that?
She trailed off, clearly unsure of how to phrase it, so I decided to come clean. Yeah, I'm set to be the next CEO. She gasped slightly but then smiled warmly.
So, all my hard work wasn't in vain after all.
I stared at her, not fully understanding what she meant.
At the orientation, when I heard the CEO's last name, I was surprised. It's not a common name, so I thought, maybe he was related to the person who helped me at the library. I was assigned to a factory at a regional branch, but I always hoped to meet you again someday. I wanted to work at headquarters and see you again. It might sound strange, but that hope became my motivation.
My heart kept pounding.
But, no matter how many times I checked the company's newsletter or the executive directory, I couldn't find the name Michael Donovan anywhere.
Her words made me scratch my head. I'm still just a regular employee. That was my choice. Hearing that, she tilted her head in confusion.
But, the reason why you knew I was promoted to headquarters is that because you're the next CEO, right?
I nodded at her question. Yeah, I saw the report. I was impressed. Though, knowing that you did it partly to meet me is a little embarrassing. I chuckled softly. I've made it this far, thanks to the encouragement you gave me back then. As I said this, she tilted her head even further, frowning slightly. Her puzzled expression was amusing, and I found myself laughing again. Back when I was in college, while helping middle schooler Sarah with her studies, I was conflicted about my own future. My grandfather had forged his own path with relentless determination, while my father silently followed the course laid out for him. I wondered if I also would have no choice but to quietly follow in my father's footsteps. One day, I couldn't help but ask Sarah, "What do you think about living a life where you just follow the path laid out for you?" She looked at me with a blank expression. I naturally understood her reaction. She was just a middle schooler. I felt ridiculous for asking such a question to a kid and quickly tried to backtrack. "Oh, sorry, forget it." However, the next moment,
If you're just riding along, it might be boring.
Sarah's quiet comment made me lean in, eager to hear more.
But if you're the one driving, you might enjoy it.
Surprised by her unexpected wisdom, I asked, "What if you can't choose where you're going?" She thought for a moment, then smiled.
But you can choose the speed and when you arrive, right? That's something you can always control.
It felt like a light suddenly shined in front of me.
Besides, maybe one day, you could stop the train and add your own tracks, right?
That thought had never crossed my mind.
Because, right now, you're teaching me math, and I'm starting to actually like it. I used to think math were impossible for me. Doesn't this mean I'm adding new tracks?
She said this with a bright smile, and it almost brought me to tears. Yes, she is right, even if you're on a set track, you can still drive with your own will. The destination might be to become the CEO. However, the journey is something I can choose. With that thought in mind, I approached my father, the CEO, and my grandfather, the chairperson, and asked to train at the new factory we were setting up in Southeast Asia. Of course, it wasn't just about training, I was determined to turn that new factory into one of the best in our company. Then, over the next 12 years, I did exactly achieve to raise the production and quality levels to the top before returning to the US. After hearing my story, Sarah blushed deeply.
As just a middle schooler, did I really say something like that? That's so embarrassing.
I chuckled. Don't call it embarrassing, those words have been precious to me all this time. When I joked about it, she suddenly looked serious.
Oh, that's right, I'm sorry.
She said apologetically, and I couldn't help but think how sweet she was. Before I knew it, the words just slipped out of my mouth. I think I'm into you, Sarah. It was our first day seeing each other again after all these years, and only a few minutes had passed. What was I even saying? Sarah looked completely stunned.
What?
I tried to carefully choose my words. I know we just met again, but actually, we met a long time ago. You were so earnest and adorable as a middle schooler, and now, I can see you decorating that sign to create work for yourself, studying programming in your spare time. Oh, sorry, I didn't even ask if you have a boyfriend. I was a bit embarrassed, so I just kept talking.
Well, I don't have one, but what about you, Mike? I mean, you must be quite experienced with women, right?
I was shocked and quickly shook my head. What? No way. I didn't have a girlfriend even while I was working in Southeast Asia. Admitting that made me feel a bit pathetic, but it was the truth.
Even so, do people usually confess this quickly?
Sarah gave me a skeptical look, and I scratched my head. I know, I'm surprised too. Maybe I'm just overwhelmed. I mean, getting to see you again after all these years, after teaching you when you were crying over your studies. At this, she pouted.
The crying part, that was unnecessary.
Then, she glanced at me.
You know what? I never forgot you either. I wanted to see you again, but you're the next CEO. I'm not sure if someone like me is.
Before she could finish, I suddenly blurted out. Please, stop. Her eyes widened in surprise. Yes, I'm on the track that leads to becoming CEO, but I'm running it as an individual employee, by my own choice. The destination might be CEO, but I want the journey, whether it's relationships or interactions with colleagues, to be as a person, not just as the top of the company. I didn't want her to be fixated on my eventual role as CEO. I wanted her to see me for who I really am. When I said that, she quietly began.
I'm sorry. To be honest, I've always thought I wasn't good enough. But still, I've been in love with you ever since you kindly helped me with my studies. So, I'm really happy.
I realized, she had always remembered me and had worked so hard all this time. I hesitantly opened my arms wide. So, does this mean we're dating? Sarah blushed a little and hesitated, but then she jumped into my arms.
Yes. I've always wanted to see you again. Thank you for making math fun for me back then.
As she said that, nestled in my chest, I found myself thanking her too. I'm the one who should be thanking you. Actually, I always wanted to be a teacher. Back then, even if just for a little while, I got to be a teacher, and I was so happy to have such a cute student. As I hugged her tightly, she giggled.
Oh, I haven't learned anything from you yet, so please teach me that programming language, okay?
She looked up at me and said,
I'm looking forward to it, Mike.
I couldn't help hugging her even tighter. 1 month later, I introduced Sarah to my family. She was flustered, thinking it was too soon, but it couldn't be helped. My family had arranged a potential marriage meeting for me. My retired grandfather had organized. As soon as I returned to the US, I almost fainted when my mother told me about it. Sarah and I aren't deeply involved yet, but I am certain about one thing. I am going to marry Sarah. In just 1 month, I am already falling more and more in love with her. She's already become an irreplaceable part of my life. The thing is, my grandfather is intimidating. He's downright scary. Still, I have my own will. Sarah is sitting next to me, stiff as a board. I was determined to protect her and stand by my own decisions. With that resolve, I faced my father and grandfather.
I won't allow it.
My grandfather said immediately, his tone harsh and dismissive.
The woman I've chosen for you comes from a distinguished family. A girl from an ordinary household is not suitable. I'll find someone who can support you.
I kept my gaze steady. I'm not looking to marry someone just because they're a good match or because I need support. I want to marry someone I can respect and who can respect me in return. He snorted.
Respect, huh? Then tell me 100 things you respect about that girl.
I widened my eyes and looked at Sarah. Then I started. Well, Sarah is kind, hardworking, determined even when she's struggling, like how she created work for herself when there was none. I continued listing all the things I admired about her. At some point, I think she flinched, but I pressed on. My grandfather's eyes grew wide, and he eventually cut me off.
Okay, all right. That's enough. It's making me sick.
He frowned, but my father was struggling to hold back his laughter. I couldn't help but smile. When I was in college, I was still unsure of myself. I thought about running away from the future that had been laid out for me as the next CEO. My words made my grandfather's eyes widen. But, during those times, it was Sarah's words that saved me. She told me that even if I'm on a set path, I could still steer my own way. Taking that to heart, I chose to go to the Southeast Asia factory, where I learned how to manage, how to communicate, how to invest in equipment. I did everything I could to prepare myself to become CEO in my own way. If I hadn't met Sarah, even if I hadn't run away, I probably would have just gone through the motions every day. For some reason, Sarah's eyes widened in surprise at my words.
That's not true. Even without my words, Mike would have found his own way and worked hard to get where he is now. My words were just a small nudge.
She spoke passionately, catching her breath for a moment.
But I want to be with Mike in any situation, not just to support him, but to run alongside him on this path.
As she looked directly at my grandfather, she appeared almost radiant. My grandfather was silent for a while, then suddenly stood up and left the room. Sarah and I exchanged glances, and my father chuckled.
He must have seen how much you've grown. I saw it too.
My father's words caught me off guard, and I widened my eyes in surprise.
The arranged marriage talks haven't progressed at all, so I'll put a stop to them. But I met your mother through an arranged marriage, and we've been happy, you know.
His words made me a bit flustered. No, it's not that I think arranged marriages are bad. Seeing my reaction, he laughed.
I know what you feel. But you know, sometimes it feels like you're using me as an example of what not to do. Just make sure you see the good in me too, all right?
His words made me feel a bit ashamed. My father is a gentle, kind man who has followed the set path without complaint. However, now, I realize how hard that life must have been, and how much he must have had to restrain himself.
I do respect you, Dad, for staying true to yourself and following the path laid out for you.
It was hard to look him in the eye as I said it, but he gave me a gentle smile. A few years later, Sarah and I got married. At the same time, I became the CEO of the company. For a while, my father will remain as chairperson to support me. After consulting with him, we decided to fully implement the staff reorganization we had been planning for a few years. When I first returned to the US and toured the offices, I was struck by the disparity between the departments. Some were overwhelmed, while others were relaxed and social. I wanted to allocate more staff to the busier departments, so everyone could work with a little more breathing room. I believe this will reduce frustrations with work and with each other. I also want to make sure that new hires, like Sarah once was, aren't left to struggle on their own. After we got married, I wanted to enjoy our newlywed life for a while, but soon, Sarah became pregnant. It's a boy, apparently. I felt a slight twinge of sadness. This child also will have a path laid out for him. I wondered how he would feel about that life. Would he wish he hadn't been born at all? Sarah seemed to sense my anxiety and sat down next to me.
It's okay. Our son will find his own way. Plus, there's no need to cling to the idea of keeping it all in the family, I think.
She is right. My grandfather might disagree, but in today's world, we need to be flexible and adapt, or we'll be left behind. For now, I just want to make sure that our employees find meaning in their work and have a good work environment. Besides, I want to ensure that Sarah and our child are happy. I'll do my best to run along the path, in my own way.